Hello, my name's Ross Woods. I'm from the University of Bristol in the UK, where I work in the Department of Civil Engineering. Today it's my pleasure to interview Professor Siva Sivapalan. I've known Siva for 27 years since I first met him at the University of Western Australia. Soon after that, I did my PhD under Siva's supervision, and we've worked together and been in contact with one another ever since. We're here in Vienna this week for the 2018 EGU meeting, and it's a great opportunity for me to ask Siva some questions about his life and his career. Siva, is there anything you'd like to say before we get started?
Thank you, Ross. I would like to thank the History of Hydrology group for finding it fit to interview me as one of their early people that they want to interview. I also want to thank you for agreeing to interview me. You and I have known each other for such a long time that I felt that you are the best person to interview me. I also want to thank Günter Bloschel, my friend here at the Technical University of Vienna, who allowed us to use his office to do the interview.
Let's start with your childhood and youth. Where were you born and raised, and can you describe the circumstances you grew up in?
So yes, I grew up in a small village called Karavati near the northern tip of Sri Lanka. You know, it's a small village 4 miles inland, and it's a very typical village, actually a farming village, and life there was very enjoyable. I had a very good time as a young boy growing up, lots of enjoyment growing up in that kind of environment. Life was very easy, lot of fun, and none of the challenges of life I had to face. So it was a very nice life up to about when I was 12 years old. Then only the life's pressures came into being. Yeah, so it was a very nice life in this village.
What kind of work did your father do?
Well, my father was what you might call a clerical servant. He was you could say a junior civil servant in the Sri Lanka Administrative Service. He was an educated man and worked in different parts of the country, so he was mostly not at home. But he was an educated man and a very cultured man, and I learned a lot of things from him. But my biggest influence at home was my mother, because she was always there, and she was basically the driving force for many things that I did in my life. Okay.
So when you got to 12 and you said life's pressures started to begin, was that when you went to high school?
Yeah, you might say that. Until that time, I studied in local schools, 3 different schools actually, primary school, middle school, and I didn't have to study. There was no studying involved. You go to school to have fun, to play, and studying happened independently and by accident. And therefore, studying was also fun. There was no homework to do. But even without all that, without too much effort, I was always the number 1 student in class. So my parents thought that I'm not going to do well if I remain in the village. So I was encouraged to go to a highly selective school about 4 miles from my house. And being a selective school, the moment you get there, the life completely changed. Now you have to work, you have to study, because you are competing against very bright students grown from all over the country actually. So life suddenly became different. Studying was different. I had to do homeworks. I had to prepare for exams. That was one reason that pressures came on being. But at the same time, my family's financial situation was getting worse at the same time. And I, being the second oldest in the family, among the children, and being the eldest boy, it was put to me that ultimately I was the one who was going to take the family out of their financial difficulties. So there was a bit of pressure on me to do well, study hard, and and somehow get a good job and get ahead and help the family. So that pressure also came on my head. So on the one hand, I had to compete. On the other hand, there was no other way to get out. So I had to work very hard. So it became harder. Life became harder, less enjoyable because of that.
Okay. So after high school, you went to university.
Right.
Where did you go and why did you go there?
Well, in Sri Lanka those days, there was not a lot of choice, and I just studied, and if I did well, then you just go with the group, and because I was in the physical sciences section, so the only thing that I can do is become an engineer. So, and there was only one engineering school at the time in Sri Lanka. That was in the Central Highlands, near a place called Kandy, which is a city in the Central Highlands. The university itself was the oldest university in Sri Lanka and the best university in Sri Lanka. And so I was selected on the basis of a competitive exam. And I just followed my classmates and just went there. It just happened. There was no prior planning or anything like that. It just happened.
Okay. And then after this, you did a master's degree.
Yeah.
Tell me about where you went and how you made that choice.
Right. So I was a good student. I would say I was an above average student. Unfortunately, I did not get first class. I only got second class upper division honors. And if you get first class honors, you automatically, in Sri Lanka those days, automatically went to England to a PhD. And in my case, I did not get first class. And I was thinking what to do. And at the time I was graduating, a number of application forms were sent to my class from the Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok. And that was for a master's degree. And without thinking too much, because that's the second best option I had, so I applied, and along with several of my classmates. And that was the time that I had to make some kind of a choice. Okay, what do I do? What do I specialize in? I really wanted to specialize in soil mechanics. That was my really pet subject. I really enjoyed the subject. I really wanted to do well. But several of my classmates also wanted to go there and do geotechnical engineering. And I thought if I selected that topic, I would be competing against them. And so I decided I'll specialize in hydrology. So I applied for hydrology, and when I did, I was the only candidate. And so I had a better chance of getting admitted to AIT, Asian Institute of Technology. So I selected hydrology as my field at the time.
And that was the first time you'd really considered water as
you would say that, yeah. I think water was, even when I selected hydrology, I was not thinking about water. It's just another field, different from structural engineering or geotechnics. But by that time, I had begun to have some idea of what hydrology was about. I felt that it was different from traditional mechanics, soil mechanics, structural mechanics, fluid mechanics. Hydrology was somehow different. I felt that I had a particular affinity to hydrology. I remember thinking that hydrology at that time, hydrology was like astronomy. That you look at something far away, and you look at some patterns that they form, and then you're trying to find out how did they happen. I mean, of course, I was not really educated at the time about hydrology, but I felt like hydrology was something like that. From whatever I was taught in class, I felt that hydrology was different, and I had an affinity to that. So there was a sense of discovery that I did not see in other fields. The other fields, you apply the knowledge that you have to solve problems. Here, before you can solve problems, you have to discover, understand something. I mean, it was not well thought out, well formulated in my mind, but that was the way I felt. So that was another motivation for choosing hydrology. Okay. But the primary motivation was that was the best way to get a scholarship. Yeah.
Okay, so when you were at AIT, are there particular things that you remember from that time that have stuck with you?
Right. AIT was one of my most enjoyable. The time I spent at AIT was one of my favorite times because I met with students from all over Asia, so it was culturally very enriching. Mm-hmm. And secondly, the education that I had already gained in Sri Lanka was of a standard that without too much effort, once again, I felt that I was doing, I could do really well at AIT. I was again the number one student at AIT, and I didn't do too much effort. It was just fun. I was playing tennis and cricket and learning swimming, and I did all these things, and it was almost like I was back in my village. Mm-hmm. My early days, I would go to school or go to class, come back and not do the homeworks because I was very confident that I would do well in my final exam, in the exam. Mm-hmm. So therefore, I was able to sort of extend myself in other ways. That was enjoyable, number one. Number two, as part of the master's degree, I had to do a thesis, and I did the thesis on time series analysis. Luckily, the work that was the project that was proposed to me by my advisor, who was a Sri Lankan, who actually taught me hydrology back in Sri Lanka. Oh. So after teaching me hydrology, he moved to AIT. It's almost like I followed him, and he was my advisor. And so a project was given to me, and I was told later that the project that was given to me was current for the time. In other words, that the same project, same idea, same topic was being researched in the West, in Europe and the USA. So working on that project later helped me gain admission for PhD in the US. So that was one of the reasons I got admitted to USA in the PhD program. So that was another reason. But my real goal was to use AIT as a stepping stone to go and do a PhD in the US at the time, because after I moved to AIT, I realized finally for the first time that UK was not the only place in the world where anything good is going on. I got to know more about America and a little bit about Australia and so on. And at that time, the place I really wanted to go to was Colorado State University. Mm-hmm. That was the hot place at the time, and several of my professors were educated there. So I wanted to go and do a PhD there. So after my master's, I had very good grades. I applied for PhD in the US. I applied to about, not all USA, but several places in the US, including Colorado State, and some places in Australia and Canada as well. And I was very hopeful. But unfortunately, I did not get admission to any school in Australia, USA, Canada. So I was very disappointed. And so I had a choice. So one, I can stay in AIT one more year and then apply again. And that was what I was going to do. So I decided, and I was given a research assistantship at AIT. So I stayed for a few months and going to wait for one more year. But my financial situation, my family's financial situation began to impact me because I'm just waiting for another year in the hope that I might get admitted to the US or for PhD. Yeah. But what happens if I don't get admitted again? And my family was putting a lot of pressure because their financial situation has got really worse. And so I was also looking for other jobs. But I was not applying because I was in a half mind. Yeah. But one of my classmates, he was applying for jobs in, Africa, Asia, all over the place. And he applied to jobs in Nigeria. And in January 1978, I believe, he got offers from 3 different places in Nigeria. And so he was so he had to select. So he selected one, and he was going to decline the other 2. So I told him, why don't you introduce me to the other guys and see whether they can give me that job that you're declining. So he wrote to them, and I got a letter from them immediately saying, why don't you come and work for us?
Okay.
So I said, okay, fine, I'll go. So I decided to go, so suspend my ambition for PhD. And so I went to Nigeria on the basis of a recommendation from a classmate for a job that I did not apply. And that's a story that repeats itself many times in my life. So yeah, I just went, and the job that he was given was as a geotechnical engineer. But when they saw my qualifications, finding out that I'm actually a hydrologist, they changed the job description to hydrological engineer. So I was selected as a hydrological engineer, and I went to Nigeria, well, only to find that the job that they actually had for me was actually as a geotechnical engineer. They had no hydrology jobs. So I fell back on my geotechnical knowledge and worked as a foundation engineer, geotechnical engineer for 3 years. And never giving up hope to do a PhD, but the work in Nigeria helped me financially. So I was able to settle all the financial problems my family had back home. So I paid off their debts. I bought land and built a house for my sister. And then I finally, after 3 years, decided that I've done my duty.
Yeah.
And told my family that I'm now going to apply for PhD in the US. And this time I did this application very systematically to the US.
So you did something different this time?
Well, very systematic. Number one, to apply for PhD positions in the US, there is something called an application fee. When I was in Thailand, I did not have the money to apply for many places. But here now I have earned some money. So I was able to apply to 15 different places in the US. And so I had a classmate of mine who was already doing a PhD in Florida. So I wrote to him, asking him to recommend universities to apply to. So he sent me, those days letters took more than 2 weeks to come from anywhere. So I had to wait, I had to write letters and then wait for the letters to come back. So he recommended that, Siva, why don't you select 15 different places, 5 top places that you most likely will not get admitted anyway, but there may be some luck, 5 intermediate places, and 5 ordinary places, that if that's all that you get, that's all you get. Yeah. So I now used the savings that I had, and I applied to 15 places.
Okay.
And waited for their responses, and only to find that every one after the other they were all declining. And I was getting really disillusioned, because I'm in a job that I really was not enjoying, because it's not my field. It's not the field that I really wanted to be in. It was very low tech, so that experience was not going to help me anywhere. That was another problem. What am I going to do? And one of the places that I applied to in the US was University of Washington, Seattle, because I had, this is to work with Steve Burgess. And I had used some papers that he had published with Dennis Lettermeyer on time series analysis. So I thought that is the area that I want to work in. And so I applied to Seattle, and one day I received a letter from Steve saying that I've got some money and I want to give you admission for you to come and work with me. And I was delighted. So I was getting ready. Okay, after 15 places, at least one place is going to give me admission. Unfortunately, 1 week later, he sent me another letter. Of course, remember, it took 2 or 3 weeks to get here. 2 weeks later, or 1 week later, I got another letter from him saying, sorry, something bad has happened. my funding is not secured. So I'm trying my best, but sorry, at the moment I cannot offer you. Well, on the same day that I got this letter from Steve, I received a letter from Princeton University saying that I have been given admission and I've been selected as one of their top students. And you please accept by next week. Because remember, 2 weeks, that letter took 2 weeks to get there.
Yeah.
I was desperate. I don't want to miss that. I don't want to wait for Steve Burgess's decision. So I immediately accepted Princeton and sent an email or letter to Steve saying that I've got admitted to Princeton, so I'm therefore unable to go to Washington. Well, 1 week later, he sent me another letter saying, everything is fine, you can come now. Well, it was too late.
Yeah.
So that's how I got admitted to Princeton. So almost like 1 out of the 15 gave me admission, and I was really, really lucky, pleased to accept that. And then, went back home to Sri Lanka, got married, and flew to New York. That's how it happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell me about how you met your wife.
That's a very, very interesting story. I could say it in one word, one sentence, or one whole paragraph. But really, I met my wife first time on the day of our wedding. I have never seen her before. The way it happens in Sri Lanka, our marriage was an arranged marriage. And, I did not want to disappoint my parents by finding my own partner. So I was willing willing to get them to choose a wife for me. Because in Sri Lanka, parents think that it's their duty. It's one of the most important things that they do in their lives, to select a partner for their son or daughter. And I didn't want to deny them that opportunity.
Yeah.
So I was willing, and I encouraged them. And so I was going to the US, and I told them I would prefer to get married before I go. So they were searching for a partner for me, and this was taking some time. And it was getting late because I had to now leave Nigeria. So I told them, sent my father a letter. Those days I used to write to my father in English, and he writes to me back in English also. So I wrote a letter to my father telling him, what's so difficult about this? If you cannot find somebody, why don't you advertise in the newspaper? And he replied back to me in a long letter, and the essence of it is that you don't have the experience to even have an opinion on this matter. That was the exact wording that he used in English. You don't have the experience to even have an opinion on this matter. Because life is, marriage is a 1,000-year crop, and you have to really find the right person, and we know we have the experience and we will do it. And I told him that's fine.
Yeah.
So, and then about a week before I was going to return to Sri Lanka, they sent me a letter saying they found one, everything is set, you come and get married and go to America.
Right.
So that's how it happened. So I went home and went back to my village, and my wife is from my village, but she lived in Colombo, the capital. And so everything was arranged in a hurry, and she came, and I was introduced to her on the day. So that's it. I did not meet her before. 2 weeks later, we were on the plane to New York.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how it happened.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about your transition to living in the West?
Right.
I guess it must have been very different to move to Princeton. Were there what things did you notice, and were there things that particularly helped you to adapt?
Right. Well, I've lived in Asia and Africa by then, but I had seen London, so I know a little bit about the West, but America was a big culture shock. The moment we arrived, it was a shock. So I think I have to accept that it was very difficult. Everything there was very different. The way that they did everything was very different. So it was a shock. To set up our apartment, accommodation and things to do, things to shop, even to buy a sandwich was a difficult thing in America. Because they have so much choice. And I had no idea that when you go to a bakery, say, please give me a sandwich, it's not so straightforward as that. You have to specify so many things, like what kind of bread, what kind of sauce. I mean, it was very difficult. So it was culture shock. Yeah. But on top of that, at Princeton, I had the additional problem that I had now worked in Nigeria on a low-level job, and I had become very rusty. You know, I couldn't concentrate. Mm-hmm. Concentration has gone out because I had always felt proud when I was an undergraduate. I had enormous powers of concentration. I felt that I had lost it. So, lost my mathematics skills and you know, all these things. So I had to start all over again. And in the 3 years period that I was in Africa, computers have changed. Whereas in Thailand, I had punch cards to submit jobs to the computer center. Here there are PCs, and you know, I had no idea how to operate them, and so technology shock was another problem. And then the other thing that I felt was, you know, Princeton is Princeton, and everybody around me, the students, for example, I felt they were very, I mean, almost supremely confident, almost to the point of arrogance. Here I am from some third world country, suddenly surrounded by students from, American students from all the private universities in the US, and I felt totally inadequate. And I just went into a shell, you know, I just went to class, went to my office, did whatever I had to do, but run away back home to my wife, because life was very tough. And, you know, I never felt that I was adequate for Princeton. I didn't feel it for a long time. I felt I was a misfit, and I was not good enough. And so I hardly ever spoke to anyone except to my advisor. So life was very tough. But later on, gradually, you know, I made some friends from India, and especially that was very helpful to my wife, because they had families, and my wife became settled down, and that also helped me a lot. So it took a long time to settle down there. So I had to say I had a lot of I felt a lot of pressure, and never felt that I was going to complete my PhD, because I felt that any time the department might come to me and said, you know, you're not doing well, we are going to terminate you. I felt that for at least 3 years. It's only after 3 years, fourth year, I began to feel that, oh, I might get a PhD. Until then, I was not confident. Right.
How did you choose your supervisor and your topic?
Well, the supervisor chose me. So the Eric Wood, I don't know what he found in me. So when I applied to Princeton from Nigeria, when 14 other universities did not select me, I don't know why he selected me in the first place. He selected me. So he had some funding, and he selected me. Okay. He never told me to this day why he selected me, except to say once that my GPA in AIT was good, and the topic that I did for my master's was current for the time. But yeah, I was very lucky that he picked me, and he picked the topic also for me. So I had nothing to do with the topic selection either. In fact, I couldn't say that there was actually a topic that I worked on. The topic was defined only when I finished my PhD. It was not defined before. It was just some nebulous thing that I did some, you know, did, and eventually we gave it a title at the end. But really, it was not the way that I later got my students to work on, you know. But this was just very nebulous.
So in the second half of your PhD, when you started to feel more comfortable, can you say a bit about what that experience was like? How did you decide what to do next? What was your relationship like with your supervisor?
The most important thing about Eric Wood, you know, my relationship with Eric Wood was that one, he had an open door. So I could always walk into his office if he's away from the phone or, not talking to anyone. I could go in. And so he always wanted to talk to me. So that was good. But every time I went to talk to him, he never told me what to do. He just talked philosophy. He just talked about thermodynamics and fluid mechanics and this kind of thing. And I had a wrong conception of what a PhD was like. I was thinking that all I have to do is my advisor will give me a topic. He'll tell me what to do. I will do it the best way I can, and I get a PhD. But Eric took it the opposite way. He was not going to tell me anything. He was not going to tell me what to do. And I was waiting for him to tell me. So it was this went on and on. I was expecting something that he might tell me to do, and he was not going to do that. And it just went on. It went on for 3 years. I had not done anything. I had not done anything at all in 3 years. And the third year, he went to England on his sabbatical. And he went away, and I was on my own. I had nothing to do. I did not know what to do. And finally, on one fine day, he called me from England. He was at Institute of Hydrology. He called me and he spoke to me for 1 hour. And finally, I got the impression that he's expecting me to do something. He's expect to start doing something, anything. So then I kind of started doing something. The moment I started doing something, by that time I had a lot of ideas in my head. I've read a lot of things, wanted to start somewhere, but did not know where to start. But I have to tell you, the moment I started, it was at the end of 3 years. My PhD from that time took only 1.5 years. I just started and it was like snowball. It just kept on going.
Okay.
And 1.5 years later, Eric had to tell me to stop. Okay, this is enough. I was thinking that I'm going to stay 1 more year. He said, no, I want you to stop now. And he gave me 1 month to finish my PhD because he wanted to keep me as a postdoc.
Right.
So it just went on very quickly. 1.5 years is all that took to complete my PhD. So it was a different kind of experience that I had with Eric compared to many other advisors that I know, including myself.
After 2 more years, I think it was, in Princeton, you then moved to Australia.
Correct.
Can you tell me about how that came about? Why did you go there and how did that
Correct.
happen?
That's a very good question because I finished my PhD and as I told you, Eric already gave me a postdoc. So I stayed. I didn't even try to apply anywhere. But my hope was that I would use the postdoc position and start applying for faculty positions. And applied to a few. There were not many positions open anyway, but I applied to a few positions and I was not selected for anything. I was not even selected for an interview. Nobody selected me for to come and do an interview. So I was waiting and getting to the point that I'm not going to be successful in this. So I was prepared to give up and go and find a job in industry. So I started applying for industry positions, but my PhD was so theoretical. I had no skills that I got out of my PhD. I was not getting any industrial positions either. So I was really getting desperate. And at the same time, we had a civil war going on in Sri Lanka. So I had to make a choice. I couldn't go back to Sri Lanka. There was no way. But I wanted to settle down somewhere and even bring my family along, the rest of the family and so on. So I needed to get settled down somewhere. So I was desperate. And on the one hand, Eric said, you can stay with me forever. Everything is going to be fine. But I felt that there are only 2 possibilities. Either I'm good for academia or not good for academia. There is nothing in between. So I cannot do an intermediate position. I had to either give up or take an academic position. But since academic positions were not available or I was not successful, I was prepared to go somewhere. I even applied to a position in Ireland. But suddenly there was an advertisement in the news in EOS for a job at CSIRO in Canberra to work with Emma Lachlan, who's the developer of Topog.
Yeah.
And I felt I was a good fit to that job because my PhD was on top model, and Emmett O'Loughlin had his topography-based model, so I would be the best person. So I applied for that position, and I was interviewed by somebody who came over from Australia and came to California. So I flew to California to be interviewed by a guy called Adrian Peck. You probably know him. He's from Perth. He interviewed me, and then I never heard about it. And months went by and never heard from them. So I decided that they're not going to hire me.
Yeah.
But out of the blue, I got a telephone call from Australia from a guy called Jo Gimberger. He called me on the phone and he said, I heard that you had not been successful in the CSIRO position. Why don't you come and work for us at the University of Western Australia? We have a position open as a lecturer. He said it's a 3-year term appointment as a lecturer, but really it's a soft money funded position. So if you come and do well, we might make you permanent, but there's no guarantee. And I told him that if you cannot give me a permanent position, or at least something that will enable me to apply for permanent residency in Australia, I'm not coming. But he was very persistent. So he went back and worked for the university to change the position into a renewable term appointment, which allowed me to apply for permanent residency. So I had that position in my hand. Okay, there's another one position. I don't know what it was about, because I didn't even think that was a faculty position. It was more like a research associate position, because I had to do some work for the Water Corporation of Australia, of Western Australia. So, but I was prepared to take it, but I held on to it for a while. I didn't make a decision. But then I had to go on a family issue. I had to go to London on a family issue. I went, and because I was traveling outside the country, I had to reapply for a visa in London. And to my bad luck, when I applied for the re-entry at the embassy in London, they refused me re-entry, and they were going to deport me back to Sri Lanka. Because they said, you were on a J visa, and if you're on a J visa, you have to go back to Sri Lanka and serve 2 years before coming back. So they were saying, okay, and so I had this choice, and then I told them, I showed them my letter of appointment from Australia. See, so I told them, I lied to them, saying, this is, I'm only here temporarily. I'm going to go to Australia. Here's their letter of appointment. And okay, then they said, okay, we'll give you a temporary entry. So they gave me temporary entry, and then I came back to the US. And of course, Princeton University told me, don't worry about it. That's just a bureaucratic thing. You can stay here. But I decided that I'm not going to stay here anymore. Right. So I took the chance and went to Australia. And I was prepared for the worst. That it could only be a temporary, research assistantship or something, where I just do some work, and then because I have permanent residency, I can always find another job. So I went there with an open mind. But the day I arrived in Perth, that afternoon I went and saw Jo Gimberger, and he immediately asked me, "Can you teach tomorrow?" Because somebody else was teaching hydrology, and that person was refusing to teach anymore. So he said, "Can you teach tomorrow?" That was the first time I realized that actually this position that I had got was actually a teaching position. And that's how it happened. So that's how I ended up in Australia.
Okay. So when you got to Western Australia, this was your first opportunity to supervise graduate students. Can you say something about how you developed your style? What were your influences or the things? How did you make your choices about how to do that?
Right, thank you. Yeah, so by the time I arrived in Australia, that was 1988. Well, the first thing is it took 5 years, or even 4 years actually, 4 years before I actually had my first graduate student. So I had to wait for some time. That was part of the problem. But by the time I started getting new students, especially you were one of the early ones, I had accumulated a lot of ideas in my head. From the times I was a postdoc at Princeton, the time I spent as a lecturer for 4 years, I had not done anything myself in that 4-year period. I had a hard time getting anything started on my own, but I had accumulated a lot of ideas. And so as the students started coming in, the approach I took is to feed them the ideas that I had already accumulated, and because I knew precisely what needed to be done. And so I kind of, early days, used the students as my extra hands and extra heads. So I just said, this is what you're doing, do it, come back and tell me tomorrow. Yeah. It was a very one-on-one style, very detailed, and it was totally opposite to what I went through at Princeton, because I felt that at Princeton, I wasted a lot of time by just moping around, not having anything to do. So I think my style was to get them, the students, from wherever they come from. I still believe in that it's not enough to tell them, okay, go and read this and learn about this and start doing something. But rather, you get them to do something and learn from doing it. So you just get on, do anything. I don't mind what it is, but just do something. Come back and tell me, and then we just work together. So it was a very close one-on-one style that I developed in early days. Actually, you probably remember. Yeah. But of course, in your case, you were slightly different because you came with your own ideas. But there were other students who had no idea, so I had to tell them what to do. And then gradually, of course, they had developed an independence, and of course, that's when I decided that they should graduate. The moment they started thinking independently, then I should not keep them anymore.
Yeah. So one of the things that developed during your time in Western Australia was the pub decade.
Correct.
How did you get started in that? How did you get involved, and why?
That was, I wouldn't say it was an accident. I remember very clearly, I had been from the time I arrived in Australia to about 1995, 96. I was working, basically it was a continuation of my PhD and postdoc, working on scale issues. Yep. So that is where, many of my students during that time, including yourself and John Snell and Richard Silberstein, Reggiani, all these people contributed to the growth of that area. Yeah. And by 95, 96, I had begun to feel that I'm just pushing something here, publishing a lot of good papers, but I was getting disillusioned, to a certain extent, because where is this all going? Just a name, there's a theme, scale, but it's just sort of, it seemed aimless at the time. So I was genuinely disillusioned. And of course, I cannot give up academia. Where can I go? But round about that time, I had a visitor. Vijay Gupta. He came over on a sabbatical, and he introduced this notion of PUB, predictions in ungauged basin. And the moment he mentioned that, of course, it's not a new problem. PUB is an ancient, old problem in hydrology. But the moment he mentioned that and what it involved, what it meant, I felt that everything that I had done before fitted into that. So I felt suddenly that there is something now that connects everything that I have done before, but also provides the motivation to go forward. And so that's how I got into PUB. It was Vijay who introduced the idea to me, and then I ran away with it. Okay. That's how it happened.
So when you said that you realized what it meant, can you say a bit more about what did the pub idea mean to you? Why did it mean something?
It meant that that we have this prediction problem. Number one, that prediction required understanding. So the reason that we cannot make predictions in ungauged basins, somewhere in Argentina, is because we don't have a good understanding of what hydrology is and what happens to rain in different parts of the world. We build on what other people have done before in our local place, and we just continue. It's kind of an empirical way, but really, if you want to make fundamental progress in predictions in ungauged basin, you have to improve your understanding of processes, and especially understanding of processes across scales. So the scale issue that I had worked on was very relevant to this problem. So that is, so in other words, the focus is on understanding. So I focus on the understanding part. We need to understand things better. And that is the way I felt, and that's the way when I actually launched the PUB initiative as part of the International Association of Hydrological Sciences, I push hard on the understanding side of things.
So one of the consequences of you getting involved in PUB is you must have met a lot more people because it was a global adventure. Can you say, what did you gain from meeting that group of people?
The most important thing, I mean, when you travel around the world I was almost like a cheerleader or cheerleader or what do you call this, evangelist. I was almost like an evangelist going around and selling the idea of PUB everywhere. I think that what I got out of the people in different parts of the world is they reinforced my enthusiasm. The most important thing I was getting from interacting with people was that there's a lot of enthusiasm out there, and there's that I became passionate about it. So that's the first thing I should say, that I got a lot of encouragement from people around the world. But regardless of that, there are other things. Of course, when you interact with people, you learn a lot of new things. So I was also learning. So every time I went somewhere, you had people with different perspectives. And hydrology is a field that everybody has experience. Everybody studied their own catchment and they gain something from it. And if you want to make a solid, unified field, you need to bring all these different perspectives together. So I was getting a lot of different perspectives on the hydrology. That was very beneficial. So, I came and did a sabbatical here in Vienna. And when I came to Vienna, 1995, I knew a lot about flood frequency curve. I was able to say that the flood frequency curve is a signature of the catchment. But I did not know anything else. But I was introduced to other signatures here in Vienna, like the regime curve, and then the flow duration curve and things like that. And so, so that helped me to think, because I had never known before, about seasonality. In Sri Lanka, there's no seasonality. So I had no concept of seasonality. But here in Europe, seasonality is very strong. So I began to say, oh my God, there is something else here. And then I got introduced to flow duration curve. So I was getting different perspectives. So the people in Europe told me something that I did not know before, I did not think about before. And it was likewise, when in 1999, I believe, I had a visitor from Germany, Hartmut Wittenberg, who came over for 6 months. And he started doing some work in using data from Western Australia, using the recession curves. And suddenly I realized, my God, there's another way to do hydrology, just analyzing the data and learning from it. That was the first time I realized that the data, you can learn from data. And he was a great exponent of that idea. So he introduced that idea to me. So I was able to put it all together. So you had perspective from Austria and Germany and from different places, and suddenly find that that I could combine them all together. That's how this whole idea of top-down modeling came about. It was based on Hartmut Wittenberg's work with me in Australia, what I had learned in Vienna with working with Gunther about these different signatures. That enabled me to sort of see the connections and put them together and say, okay, there's another way to do this, learning from data. That's how that happened. And that was an important moment in my career, that moving from the traditional reductionist way of doing things to this different way of doing things. And I have to say that I had a student at that time. He came in and wanted to do a PhD in hydrology. How do you teach somebody who had no background in hydrology or fluid mechanics, anything? How do you teach them hydrology? How do you get them to do a PhD in hydrology? But he was very good with computers, mapping and all this. He was a surveyor. So I got him to work with Hartmut Wittenberg because I knew he could analyze data. So that was the only thing that I could ask him to do. In other words, learning something from data. So that's how his PhD got started. And then I had other students. So in other words, the top-down approach was almost forced on me, because that was the only way I could get somebody to do some work.
Right.
Because there was nothing else I could give him to do.
Okay.
He had no knowledge of hydrology. So that's how. So you can call it accident, but you can call it serendipity. But that's how a new way of doing things got started. Learning from different people and adapting yourself to a new situation.
Okay. So in 2005, I think it was, you decided it was time to move again.
Yeah.
How did you decide where and when to go?
Oh, I think that decision was forced on me. Around about 2003, 2004, my department at the University of Western Australia was going through turmoil, and I had a foreboding that something is going to happen, and because we were in a bad situation at the time, and of course I was secure, I was tenured. I still felt that if I stay here, I'll just get caught up in this muddle. One fine night, I called Jeff McDonald, because I was in a really bad situation. I was really upset one day, and I called Jeff McDonald and asked him, Jeff, if you know of any positions in the US, please let me know. I am interested in leaving. Well, he immediately told me that, Siva, I just come back from University of Illinois, because they have a new initiative to hire several people in the water area, and they invited me, and so he went there, but he had no intention of leaving Oregon State to go to Illinois, but I can recommend you. So he recommended me to them, and then asked me to apply. So I applied, and that's how I ended up in Illinois. So it was kind of once I applied, of course, I had a good chance, because my credentials were very good by the time. So it was easy sailing from there.
I wanted to ask you about research methods and research style. There are lots of different ways to study hydrology, and if my perception of you is primarily as someone who develops concepts and ideas. Do you think that's fair? Is that a fair summary of you?
Yes, I think I would say that. I think, I don't know whether that is a conscious choice, but I did not want to, always I wanted to go for something fundamental about anything. So I was never happy about research based on just method development. It's not something that excited me. So if there are methods, of course you have to use methods. Research cannot be done without doing something. So there are always methods, but the methods come and go. You change, you adapt to methods, but the goals always remain the same, which is the fundamental, the fundamental question that you are after. So that I never enjoyed getting stuck into one method. In fact, through experience, I learned that if you get stuck in one method, it will only hurt you in the long term. I want to avoid getting stuck. So because these methods come and go. When I was doing my master's degree, at the time the time series analysis was hot topic, and I almost believed at the time, without knowing, that time series analysis was hydrology. Only to realize later that time series analysis is a method. It can be applied to economic time series or hydrologic time series or any time series. It's not hydrology. Of course, there are later fads, along turning band method or fractals, Krieging, and all these things come along. Finite element method. All these different methods. People for a while believed that is hydrology, only to realize later that some other method. So method came along and you just drop it, or you can always push a button in MATLAB, you can get that whole thing done without even thinking about it. So that told me that I should not get stuck in methods. I should always asking fundamental questions, find the best method to solve it.
Some of your graduate students, we got together a few years ago to share our experiences of being your student, and several of us remembered the same thing, this idea that you think of yourself as cutting a path through the jungle or making a new road or something like that. Is that?
Yeah, I'm fond of saying that, but I don't know whether I'm the originator of that idea, but I may have heard it from Eric Wood, but I believed in it because I always think that when research is like cutting across a thick jungle, you're going from one end of the jungle to the other end, and the reason I used to use that quote is, if you look down, you want to go somewhere, you look down and clear the path, and you can spend a lot of time clearing the path and building a nice road and covering it with bitumen and everything is clean and everything, and before you go to the next step. Well, you can do that meter by meter by meter, but your focus is on the ground down, not in the front. So you can build several meters of road, so you won't get too far, but by the time you actually get far, you might end up somewhere else instead of the place that you actually wanted to be. So the most important thing is always look up. Just go there and you do whatever is necessary to clean the road, but not to be perfect. So just get across the jungle first. The best prize comes when you actually cross the jungle and go to the destination you wanted to go to. That's most important than getting a clean road to get there. Okay. I think that can be done by somebody else. That's the way
That's what guides you.
That's the principle that guides me.
Yeah.
Get to the end.
So what would you say motivates you when things are challenging? What keeps you going?
What keeps you going? I always talk about the fire in the belly. It's something in me that just keeps pushing me. That is not that I want to solve the world's water problems as good that can be, or I want to discover something. Really, there's something in me that says, that demands me to, this is the only way, people will respect me or something. It's just something is driving, and that is what is driving me. So it's not to solving the world's water problems or solving the hydrological problems. Those are nice, but somehow getting recognized is an additional motivation that pushes me. That I want to be there. I want to, because of where I came from, I guess. Right. Because I went through hard times, and the only way I could get any kind of recognition, any kind of respect, is when I was better than the next person. Okay. Because something that I heard from my English teacher back in high school that none of my classmates remember that I remember. There must be something about it, something about me in this. But I heard it from my English teacher. He said, if you want to be equal to someone, or before you want to be equal to someone, you have to be their superior. So it's if you ask me what is the driving force, that could be the driving force. That's the one that's keep me going even to this day.
So I think you're now quite well acknowledged as a leader in our field. What would you say is your approach to leadership?
Appeal to self-interest. Because if you want to get you to work with me, or if you want to help me, you will do that only because it's in the best interest of you. So the best way to lead is to appeal to people's self-interest. So this is a principle that I adopted, certainly in pub, because in pub I had to lead people around the world, from all around the world, and what am I going to give them? I cannot give them money because there's no money in it. So the only thing I can do is to appeal to everybody's self-interest. That was the motivation I used. So if you ask me my style of leadership, I've been in leadership positions in several research projects. PUB is one example. the synthesis project that I led in the US, the social hydrology movement that I'm leading now, all of these things, my approach to leadership is to appeal to people's self-interest. And people, because they know that by working with me, they get something out of it, but I also give them a lot of opportunities. So I think that if you ask me, I had to think about it, but I think that is to appeal to people's self-interest. Okay. That is my style of leadership.
Right. And I guess one of the things that goes with leading large groups of people is networking.
Right.
How important is that?
Oh, it's extremely, extremely important. I mean, I couldn't have done any of the things that I had done in my life, my career, without the networking that I set up. And I think it's very similar to my style of PhD supervision. Everybody that comes into the network, my network, is really, to an extent, my extra hands and my extra brains. I have a big problem to solve. I mean, I don't want to take it as totally personal, but it's really a community effort. But from my perspective, the network that comes together is addressing something bigger than each one of us. Because this is a bigger problem than anyone can solve individually. So we had to get people to come together, and then you appeal to their self-interest, and then if I'm the leader, I use them to give them opportunities, and I get them to contribute, and that's where the networking comes.
Right.
And I think that has really helped in the pub movement, in the social hydrology movement, in the synthesis project. Is really, use these people, use their self-interest, use them in that way as extra hands and extra brains, and to do something bigger than any one of us. I think that is the most important thing I can say about networking. That's where it helps.
One of the things I remember about you when I was a graduate student is that it felt like you worked 7 days a week and you never really stopped. Are you still like that? And if you are, how have you managed to juggle all your other commitments that are not to do with work?
Well, yeah, I think I'm still like that. I'm still, if you ask my wife, she will be telling you that I'm still the same person, still working 24 hours a day, concentrating on my work. Yeah, so that is still the case. But there are two things. One is my wife has been very helpful. That she took care of the family, so I didn't have to spend a lot of time looking after issues. So she controlled everything. She managed everything really well, especially the children, because they had a good time with the family, and they never felt isolated or abandoned. So she took care of that. That's one important thing. My wife, the way she handled it. The other is that even though I cannot claim that I spend a lot of time in the family and taking care of things, whatever I did, all the family issues, when your son gets sick, or when somebody dies in the family, when you have issues, real bad issues come up, sometimes you might feel that they are kind of distracting. You have to stop work and go and. But I think that is also important in your life. These so-called distractions or these issues that you have to deal with in the family or extended family, they're also important. I also remember I went through a period of time when I had a civil war going on in Sri Lanka. So that brought in a lot of additional issues that I had to deal with. But I always felt that my life was richer because of that. So I was working on full time on my research, but I was not completely abandoning these other things. I had a hand in dealing with these issues, and you need them. Even if they take time away from you, you need that kind of distraction, because otherwise life, you can become like a machine, and you can easily get burned out. So I think one way to not get burned out is to actually have other distractions, like the family, like going and playing cricket with your children and all that. This is important. I think it's not. You might think that short term it takes time away, but actually in the longer term, actually keeps you sane, and gives you something at the end of the day that you feel that you have lived your life to the fullest.
Yeah, I guess anyone who's had the opportunity to walk into your office at the right time of year will see that there might be a cricket score sitting on the corner of your screen, or maybe a radio commentary going in the old days when I was a student.
Right.
So cricket's a big passion of yours?
Cricket is a big passion of mine, yes. And even to this day, even when I'm living in the US and there's no cricket live broadcast on TV, I'm still following cricket. Cricket is a good game in that sense. It's a distraction, as I said, it's a distraction. So I'm writing a paper and I always check the scores. Wherever the game is going on in South Africa or Australia or Sri Lanka, I'm following the scores. That's very helpful. It's a distraction. It's a good distraction to have. But cricket is also a game that has a lot of lessons for you. In fact, I would say of all the games that we know, soccer and football and cricket has additional qualities. For example, if you are a batsman and you are part of a team of 11 people, but you go there in the field and you are a batsman, you're facing the ball coming from the other end. When you do that, when you face the ball that is coming at you at 100 miles per hour, you're on your own. You have a partner at the other end, but you're on your own. 11 people march, hovering around you to catch you, and on your own. So it's an individual game. So at that moment you are individual, and you have to play by the hour, by the minute, by the day. Because every shot counts, and sometimes you have to play a fast game, and or sometimes you have to wait. There's defense and offense, and and sometimes you have to play with soft hands. When things are going bad against you, you play with soft hands. Just make sure that you can pass the time for now, not getting out. So there's a lot of good life lessons in cricket. So that's another reason I enjoy cricket. So I think it's almost like if you're a cricketer and you're a batsman, you're almost like a research leader. Because you're on your own, you have partners, you have team members, but you're on your own because you have to. And there's a need to survive. So cricket, we survive for 5 days. Play for 5 days, and an academic career is like a lifetime. So it's like that kind of a game. You accumulate scores, accumulate numbers over time, and so it's very similar.
Right.
Very similar to academic life, actually.
You have a big scientific network, so you've learned to meet lots of people there outside work. Do you also have a big personal network?
Very much. I have it's because of my situation. So I'm from this little village in Sri Lanka. I studied in several schools. I studied at the university in Sri Lanka. I studied at AIT in Bangkok. I worked in Nigeria. I studied in the US, and I basically have a lot of relatives and friends that I made along the way. And because of the situation in Sri Lanka, they are kind of spread all over the world. So now they are in England, they are in Canada, they are in Australia, and we still remain connected. And so anytime I've traveled anywhere, I can easily find a friend. I just went to Auckland, New Zealand last year in November. I met a classmate of mine in Auckland. And we had a class get-together for my undergraduate class, get-together in Melbourne. Out of 150 classmates, 50 of them turned up in Melbourne, Australia. If I go to London, there are so many people that I have there that I don't even tell them that I'm coming, because if I tell them I'm coming, then everyone wants to meet with me, and it's impossible to do. So I have an immense network of people. I remain connected. And I think it brings me a lot of pleasure to have this kind of a network, both professional and personal, because I feel connected. I feel really, really connected. The famous book by Fritjof Capra, called The Web of Life. What you are is what you're connected to. So we are part of a web. And I feel I'm connected to a web of friendships and friends, colleagues, relatives who are scattered around the world. They make me what I am today.
Which people would you say have had the biggest influence on your career?
Yeah, there are a small number of people that I would say had the biggest influence. I think I would start with my mother, because she was an amazing lady. You know, she created the fire. Really, if I have any fire in my belly, it comes from her. She was an amazing lady. She managed to run our family and give us all the inspiration and motivation to do well. Took care of all the problems, and so she was an amazing lady. And there was a high school teacher, high school mathematics teacher that I had, and I can easily say before him and after him. It was just like in 2 years, you know, he turned me around. So 1968, at the beginning of 1968, I was forcibly taken from my biology class into a physical science class because they wanted me to do an engineering degree, not go for engineering, not for medicine. That's my uncle's choice. So I was caught in the middle, and I had abandoned mathematics by that time. My performance was very weak, at the early days. But this person took me into his confidence, and in 2 years, from being the worst student in the class in mathematics, in just less than 2 years, I became not only the best student in class, I was one of the best students in the whole of Sri Lanka in mathematics, pure mathematics. So he was a very, very important influence in me. My high school mathematics teacher, his name is Ratna Sapapati. I always point to him as an important influence in me. I would say later on, if you go from there, I think I always mention Eric Wood, and not for anything else, but just for the fact that he gave me admission, because 15 other places did not give me admission. He saw something in me and gave me admission. So I am very grateful to him, and likewise I'm very grateful to Jörg Imberger. When I couldn't get any job in the US, not even an interview, he hired me without even an interview, on the basis of an interview with somebody else that I failed. So he took me in. So I'm very grateful to him. Another person I mentioned earlier is Vijay Gupta, because he introduced pub to me at the key moment in my life. And then I have to say the person who uses this office, Gunter Bloschel, was also a very big influence on me. He saw something in me that other people did not see, and I have started working with him in 1993. It was an accident that I met him, but then since then we have worked together for such a long time that I'm also very grateful to him. And of course, finally, I have to say my wife, because she made it all easy for me to concentrate. In my language, in my Tamil language, there's a famous saying, you need a wall to paint a masterpiece. And so, you need someone, so she was like the wall. And because of that wall that was there, I could paint a masterpiece. So I think I would say she was an important influence on me. But of course, as we talked, we had several other influences. I never consider myself as a, greatest intellectual. I had a lot of limited abilities, but I managed to get other people to work with me and help me. So I have to say that the many students that I had along the way, they all had an influence on me. they managed to do things that I couldn't do myself, but they did, and I'm also very grateful to them. Yeah, so that would be my last to my students.
Would you say that you have scientific heroes? People maybe in the same discipline as you or other disciplines who you look up to or admire or use as inspiration?
Yeah, I think I always used to say that Jim Doog from Ireland, he passed away, was somebody that I looked up to. With Clemish, who was from Canada, but previously from former Yugoslavia, I always enjoyed his writings and got inspired by his writings. Tom Dunn is somebody, I never worked with him, but I always felt that, he had something to offer me. And so I think those are the immediate names that come to my mind. But if you recall, three of them, there's something that I value in people, is, you can be a very busybody, you can do a lot of things, you impress people by doing a lot of different things, lots of things, by the accumulation of the work that you do. But the people that I appreciate more are the people who are the wise people. They get some wisdom out of what they do. In India, we call them sages, the wise people. So I think that I always felt that somebody like Jim Doog, somebody like Tom Dunn, they permeate certain wisdom. It's not the technical things that they did. It's the wisdom that they provide you that I really appreciated. Okay. So for that reason, I would call them my heroes.
Okay. You've worked on several different topics in your career and in several different places and with different people. How much of that was planned and strategized, and how much of it is more circumstance?
I think it's a combination of both, I have to say, because life is never a straight line. But so I had my distractions. I went this way and that way, moved around. There's a lot of meandering, branching out and so on. But in hindsight, where I am now is where I want to be. So somehow I managed, starting 30 years ago, when I thought about what research I want to do, when I did all the readings, was thinking about what I should be doing, where I should be going, that's where I actually got to. I feel really proud that I managed to get to the place where I want to be. But it went through some meandering here and there, but so I managed to get there. So I couldn't say it was a total accident that I'm here, because I had actually thought about coming here. For example, I was inspired by this classic paper by Jim Doog in 1986, Searching for Laws. Yeah. Now that provided the motivation. I was thinking about that repeatedly. Every other day I would think about it. Every other day I think about it even now. So that was almost like a compass that was guiding me. And but along the way, I gave you already examples. I started somewhere and accidentally got into this top-down modeling, top-down learning. I went to this, you can say accidentally, because I learned along the way. I never thought about that before. Yeah. But now thinking back, I couldn't have done what I have done without that step. And now, so how did that happen? Accidentally, but it needed to happen. Yeah. But again, people say, Louis Pasteur, I think, who said that it needs the prepared mind. You are prepared, and when the accidents happen, they look like accidents, but they're not totally accidents. So I think there's a combination. But I think that on the other hand, some of the things that I wanted to do, I had the idea even then at the beginning.
Were there other things that happened where if you had your time again, you would do them differently?
There are very few things that I would do differently. I think I look back. I have always looked back. It's a discipline that I do. Always look back where I came from, and there are very few things that I would not do or do differently. Some things I felt I have not finished, but it's not such a disappointment. But for example, I worked on the REW approach to hydrology, the modeling and theory development and so on, and I feel like I have not completed it.
Yeah.
I started it, and then I dropped. People think that I dropped it. It's not that I dropped it, but the opportunity never came to continue that.
Yeah.
But so that's the area that's kind of open-ended there, that I should have completely finished it, but I felt that I did not have the skills to do it. I mean, so I needed someone else to do it, but I couldn't find somebody to do it, so I just dropped it. But that's the only thing that I feel that, my God, if only I had the time to do it, I would have done it. But other than that, I think I wouldn't do it in any other way.
Okay.
This is the only way.
How about when things go wrong? When things that we might label failures?
Yeah.
How do you deal with those? What's your attitude to?
It's like you hit against the wall or hit against the ceiling. I do not believe in just trying to break down the ceiling or break down the wall. Just sidestep it.
Okay.
So if you are faced with failure, just go around it, because it takes a lot of effort and stress. Just wasting your time breaking down something. Just get around.
Banging your head on the wall.
Get around it. So this is my style. My approach to challenges, difficulties, failures is get around it.
Okay.
Get somebody else to do it. But my goal is somewhere else. So I don't want to be distracted.
Yeah. Do you have any observations about the sort of attributes and behaviours that our research culture at the moment encourages? Are there some attributes that are overvalued and some that are undervalued?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say overvalue. I mean, I'm not sure. I think that the focus on funding, it's preventing good ideas to be executed. I mean, so a lot of people are just going after money instead of. So they are always sidetracked by the money. Instead of going where they want to go, they just getting sidetracked, which is something that I never enjoyed. There's also a kind of a bandwagon effect in the field. When somebody does something, everybody, without thinking, follow them. I would never do that. I would rather be a leader than a follower. And I would never abandon something that I really want to do because there's money here somewhere else. So I think that is basically what I can say about that. And I think that I would rather people not follow the bandwagon idea or effect. People do think on their own, try to be leaders on their own, and there's always things that you can do with little money, because money can distract you from the things that you really want to do. But otherwise, I mean, I think the funding culture, the research culture is different in different places. So you do the best you can. Yeah.
Okay. Are there times that stand out in your career as the most satisfying, or the moments when you were happiest or most pleased with how things were?
If I could look back in time, my time in my village when I was a young boy was a very happy time.
Yeah.
When I was in Thailand as a master's student, that was a very happy time. No cares in the world. But I think nowadays, once I'm into the research career, the happiest I have been in the company of others. So when I'm doing something together, For example, when I was leading the synthesis project in the US, so we took a bunch of students to Vancouver for 6 weeks and we worked together. I really enjoyed that period. Very productive, almost exhilarating time. When we are working together on something, it was really exhilarating. Or I organize small workshops, where 20, 30 people come together and we brainstorm. That is the most exhilarating. That's the most enjoyable time of my career. Those when I'm doing that kind of thing.
Okay.
So I think. So I as I told you, I'm happiest when I'm in the company of people, and we are working together, exchanging ideas, interacting, and that is when I'm happiest.
Right. Do you have any advice for young hydrologists about what should they look at? What should they try? How should they go about choosing problems and deciding how to attack them?
One piece of advice I already told you is never fall slave to a method. I think that you should genuinely address problems. Problems can be of many kinds. So research should be about solving problems. So real problems, real questions, that you choose the best method that you can use to address them. That's the first piece of advice. It's something that is fundamental, so it goes to the heart of me, that because I felt that over time, we in hydrology have been sidetracked by method that came in and confused people from the real questions. So I think that's the number one piece of advice I would give anybody, to pick a problem and go after that problem. Ideally, you should pick a problem that requires a lifetime to solve, because then just keep to it. You want to address this problem. It's not going to be solved in 1 day or 1 year, one PhD. It requires several PhDs, but just keep at it and keep going after it, and you will succeed if you keep at it.
Okay. And any final concluding remarks, things about what needs to be done in the field of hydrology, things that you see as big opportunities, or any other reflections that you have about where we might go?
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, one of the things that has happened in hydrology, hydrology has become, a word that I have seen has become canalized. In other words, it's been fragmented because we specialize in different things over time, and if we allow this to remain canalized, it's going to be fragmented so much that people can become confused about what hydrology is, and then we will not be able to solve the kind of problem that we have still to solve, because we have become so specialized that one person doesn't know what the other person is doing, and we don't have the common language. So I think that one of the things that we should keep doing from time to time to bring people together, to synthesize instead of canalizing, synthesize together. That's something that we as a community should do: synthesize and come together and define common things and move forward from there and so on. So it's something that is lacking at the moment because you've become too specialized, too canalized. So I think we need to avoid that, and so that's the number one thing that comes to my mind.
Right.
That and I mean, a good example is that even after 60 years of very solid research, we have learned a lot in the last 60 years of hydrology. 60 years ago, when I was studying, 50 years ago, when I started studying hydrology, compared to what we have now, we know now, what we do in research now is so different. We have become a very richer field, for that matter. But look at the textbook that we are using to teach. The textbooks are still in the 1960s and 50s. So that's an example of lack of synthesis. So we are teaching, we do research on very advanced stuff, but then when we go to class, we teach something that we learn from our own teachers, who learned from their teachers 60 years ago. So the books have not changed. I think that's a sign that our field is not healthy, unless we actually fix that problem. So I think that the more we specialize, the more we should synthesize. That's a cycle that we should continue.
Okay.
I think it's about time that we do that. And the other important lesson for me is, of course, as a catchment hydrologist, is that we've treated for a long time catchments as individual objects, but catchments are connected. Catchments are connected in time and in space. So there's no reason why we should just continue with the same thing. So I would suggest that we actually should broaden the field as we specialize. Look at other scales, because many of the problems that we deal with in hydrology or water are not catchment scale only; they are regional. So I think that's another branching out that we need to do. So I would expect that next 50 years hydrology will change again in a big way, and whoever wins, whoever succeeds is that person who actually sees where the field is going or should be going, and capture that moment and become the leader of it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Siva. I've really appreciated hearing from you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for interviewing me. I really enjoyed this experience, and I hope that the people who are listening can gain some insights about what it takes to succeed in hydrology. Thank you.